Hey, welcome back to the podcast. We're here with Shaahin Cheyene from Podcastcola.com, and we're going to be talking about the most fun topic in the world ever, which is podcasting. We're going to talk about how to use podcasting to double your revenue, to sell a product or service, how to build reliable supply chains, and so much more. So, Shaahin, glad to be talking to you.
Yeah, so nice to be on, man.
Yeah, and glad to have you. And you know what? Before podcasting, I used to think that the only people that could really succeed and make it were those people that were sociable and had lots of friends and could go to networking events and mingle. But the good news is that now, because of Zoom and remoting in, you can have all these conversations all day long, sales calls, podcast interviews to raise your profile, and so much more. So yeah, tell me about podcasting and what you do and what makes you stand out.
Yeah, so I'm an entrepreneur. I've started multiple companies, and I kind of have this superpower, which is spotting trends. And lately, anybody who's a marketer will know that one of the most difficult things has become how to advertise and market your product or service. And I spotted this a little while back. Facebook ads have gotten way expensive. They're getting very difficult to return ROI. TikTok seems to be the dominant force, but nobody buys anything on there. So everyone's like, what the heck's going on there? People are still trying to figure out what is new for the time that we're in as far as how to market your product or service, which brings me to podcasts. Podcasting has been around forever, but just as of the last few months and the last year, it's experienced a resurgence. Why? Because podcasts, unlike traditional advertising, especially long-form podcasts, allow you to get to know the person. So, for example, if you are trying to sell your product or your service and you run a short-form ad or any kind of video ad on TikTok, there's the guy scrolling through it, it might be appropriate, right? And he might click on your ad and awesome. You just paid however much money and you got that warm or hot lead. But oh, wait a second, look over there. It's an attractive female dancing in a string bikini. And he's already forgotten about it. Not so with podcasts. You come with me to the gym. Perhaps if you're listening to this, you're listening to it in your car, on your commute. You're listening to it when you go on your walk or your run. People travel with you so they get to know you in detail. Secondly, that ad disappears. People forget about it. But on a podcast, it lives forever. So I started doing podcasts for my book that came out, which covers the story of my life. It's called Billion, How I Became King of the Thrift Cult. And my goal was to get a major motion picture film deal, which very quickly I secured. The book went to #1 bestseller, and I've got all these people interested, and we were just this week selected a director and it's going into production. So I'm super excited about that. But what I realized is that podcasts are super, super powerful. And really, I think we're going to be the dominant form of media going forward.
And I agree with you that when you're running a paid ad, you're trying to get someone to flip out of one mode and into another. And it's hard enough with Google ads or Facebook ads already, where they're like, you figure, well, they're sort of in a buying mood, but it's really established, so it's expensive. And then you think, well, some new platform like TikTok, well, it's cheaper, but then any kind of social platform, I'm thinking as an advertiser, like they're not even in a buying mood at all. And the attention span is so short. And then, I'm sure that you've heard of these stats about how like some percentage of your podcast listenership will listen to like every single thing that you listen to, and that podcasting is finally a place for the long form to come back. Because I mean, there were those good old days of blogging. Remember the good old days when you could write like a 50-page long blog post and people would actually go to a comment form and fill in their name and their address and a big paragraph. And I mean, forget it nowadays. And maybe on like social media, leave a comment or something. But it seems like those days are back with podcasting, of being able to just kind of try out your content and say what you want and take your time and then like build that relationship that you're saying, like kind of the know, like, and trust. And you think like, okay, so this guy Shaahin, he's really got the personality. He's got this goal. He's driven. He wants to have the motion picture. But then I have these conversations. Like I was even talking with my wife yesterday, and I was trying to convince her to be on podcasting, and she's afraid of being on camera. which seems ridiculous in this day and age, right? Of social media, when you're using your real name and with everyone like using the, the cell phone camera. So what would you say to someone out there, such as my wife, who says, I've seen people on podcasts or on video, but I have the hang about being on a podcast. How do people get over that?
Yeah, so look, it takes a minute. So I'll tell you the follow-up to the story is I started doing these shows and I got really good at it. And I learned that I would get much more shows if I wasn't representing myself. So I actually started a company. I hired a couple girls, trained them on what I was doing. And I saw that the hits that I was getting, bigger, better shows, way more shows, just exploded when I wasn't representing myself, because people take you more seriously when you're represented by a reputable agency. And then people started asking me, hey, can you do this for us? And that's how we started Podcastcola. Now, to answer your question, most of our clients stay on for at least a year. Why? Because what you think is interesting about you might not be what the podcast hosts think is interesting about you, and it might not be what the audience that you're trying to target thinks is interesting about you, which is some of the value that we provide as a podcast booking agency. Is we extract that story, because we've done it for so many years now. We know exactly what the shows are looking for. We craft that story and we get you out there. Now, here's the thing. Unless you're a superstar and you're a public speaker and you do this for a living and you're really effing good at it, I promise my wife I would not curse on your show. So you will suck the first few weeks of doing shows, maybe the first couple months even. You might think you're great, but wait till your third month. Wait till something clicks and you go, oh, now I've done 10, 20, 30 shows and this is what they want. They might, even though it's a long form show, hosts like yourself and like me, we want those sound bites. We want those memes that we can take and spread out over social media. So you got to have those ready when you get on. You got to be desperate. You got to be excited about what you're talking about. What it is. If you're the world's best dentist, and I've got a friend and a client who is the world's best dentist, when he goes on, you can see him heating up and getting excited about everything that he's talking about, right? So if you get on these shows and you're like, so what do you do? Well, I do this and that, it's going to be effing boring then. No one's going to want to hear them. So it takes a while to build up the pace, the cadence, and the best way to learn to swim is to get in the water and start doing strokes.
I love it. I mean, it's Dunning-Kruger, right? It's like when you were a teenager, you thought you knew everything, and then all these years pass, and then you realize, whoa, like not only I didn't know what I didn't know. I knew I was like way worse off than I thought I was. And you always hear about how someone will like go through and like figure out a speech, or like a politician will do like the speeches all around the country and figure out their best material. Stand-up comedians, same idea. Like you can try all day long to to put out the material that you think everyone wants, but until you actually test it and you see what the feedback is, then that's a whole other different story. That's
right. Have you ever noticed how newscasters speak in a certain way from WCC News, right? And nobody would ever talk like that in the real world.
Right.
Why do they talk like that? Because they've learned the language of news. They've learned how to present so it's clear, so that it's properly paced, so that the majority of people will listen to it. Did they talk like that the first day on the news? No. But they've mastered that. And so when we watch it, even though it's completely effing wacky, like it's just a wacky way of talking, if you ever look at it, it makes sense when you're watching that piece of news. Similarly, with podcasts, it's the same way. Not that you have to talk like that, but you have to be authentic. You have to be real. You have to be dynamic. And you have to be able to get your message out in a way where you are a delivery system for your message. And if you want those people who you're talking to convert to whatever it is, the product, the service that you're selling, to get your freemium thing, to get top of funnel for whatever it is that you're doing, you need to be able to speak the language of that business. And look, like I'm partial, but one of the best ways to do that is to bring on a professional, be it us, Podcastcola, or any other agency, but to bring on a professional who knows how to do that. But even with that, it's going to take some time for you to build. But when you do, you can just get on shows and just like right now, me and you were talking, you know, very astutely at the beginning of the operation. You're a podcast, let's just do it. And so we just get on, and this is going to be a rocking show. I'm super excited.
So I guess that the answer for anyone out there that wants to do podcasting is just do it. Know that it will be rough around the edges until you kind of develop your best material. And one thing that I want to kind of alert you to here is I might have to pause for a second because I don't know if your noise cancellation is kind of turned up too much or something. I'm kind of like losing you with audio. I'll pause real quick and we can resume. Okay, so we got the audio fixed, and so you're talking about Podcastcola, and I'm curious to know what it is because in my head I'm thinking like it might be like one of three things, or maybe even all three of those things combined. So, what is Podcastcola? And then to give us an idea of what you do that makes you unique, do you have a fun success story or case study to share with us about one of these clients of yours that you helped out a bunch?
Yeah. So, okay, with podcasts, here's the other thing, guys. Quantity does matter. Quality is important. Quantity is important. And just staying relevant is important. So for most people who don't know, when you do a podcast that lives forever on the internet, everything that you say becomes searchable, especially if you're using a software like otter.io, which is a free AI software that takes all the words that you say and turns them into text that you can later put on your blog or your website so it becomes searchable. Doing podcasts is the number one most important thing you can do for your SEO or search engine optimization for anybody that doesn't know what that is. Now, at Podcastcola, what we do is we get people booked on shows. And how we do it is that over the course of the last several years, we have built out the algorithm. I learned the hard way what works and what doesn't work. And I use this as a funny example. I'm going to ask for a funny story. Have you ever been to like a nice neighborhood and there's houses for sale and you see them people buying and selling houses, and there's one house for sale and you wonder what's wrong, why it hasn't sold until you see the sign that says for sale by owner. And people are just like, oh man, right? And it's always some whack job who wants too much or too little or has too many demands or doesn't understand how the market works. Similarly, in the podcast world, you don't want to be the dude holding up the sign, please buy my house, right? There's a value to professionals. And that's what we bring. We bring relationships. We've been doing it for so long. We got relationships with thousands of shows, maybe tens of thousands of shows that we can say, hey, because of our reputation, go ahead and take Robert on because he's amazing. And they will just take you on for that. No pitch needed. Secondly, the fact that you have a professional tied to you tells them that, hey, this is somebody that's serious about what they're doing. Somebody who's put time, money, effort, energy into what they're doing. And that we should take this person more seriously. You'll notice that a lot in the publishing world. Like, self-publishing, although now with Amazon and print on demand has become more acceptable, generally speaking, if you're representing yourself, not publishing yourself because that's become more accepted, but if you're representing yourself, shows generally won't take you. And if you think about it, how many people have you seen on the news that ended up representing themselves? Very few. The people that represent themselves is because the people who get on those shows are people who have professionals representing them. So whoever you choose, be it Podcastcola or whoever, get a professional to represent you. It's worth it as far as the investment goes. The second point that I would tell people that's really important is sell through story. Don't get on a show and just sell. And a lot of beginners make that mistake because people will tune out if you get on a show and all you're doing is pitching your stuff. They're like, man, this dude just wants to sell me like what they're selling me. I'm going to discount everything else that they say because I'm seeing it through that lens. Rather, come in and bring value. So just like I'm doing now, I'm giving you guys several points of value that's important. And if people find value in what you say and what you do, and you're authentic, which is the third thing, just be yourself. So like to your point, Robert, just freaking relax. Just relax and be yourself, smile, laugh. the person on the other end may be just as nervous as you are. Maybe not if they're a pro like you, but in general, they don't know you. You don't know them. Relax and just be a human. And that will translate to the audience who's watching the show. But at the end of the day, what you do is you just give value 5 times. And if people are interested in what you're doing, they will come to you, and you can tell people how to find you. I tell people, hey, we've got a newsletter. If you're interested in that, if you want a free consultation, if I can direct you in how to perform better on podcasts, just reach out to me. Go to podcastcola.com and book a time with us, which, by the way, anybody on the show is free to do. But I don't sell on shows. And it's worked miraculously because we have more business than we know what to do with, just from people saying, hey, I really enjoyed what you talked about. And the crazy thing, Robert, sometimes it's completely unrelated. I'll talk about my 9-year-old. I'll talk about jujitsu. I'll talk about just a fun story that has nothing to do with the business. But people are like, you know what? I get you. I like you because you are like me. And I want to work with people that are like me, people that are authentic, people that have a purpose. And that's what people look for.
And so I guess the lessons I'm getting from all this that you're saying is that, number one, it's not just one shot, right? It's not just, I better make this work. I'm going to go on this one podcast. You could go on multiple podcasts. And I've had so many episodes like what you're mentioning there, where me and the guests, we just kind of talk about some off topic stuff. And then we end up kind of touching on some real deep, like life lessons and business lessons and things like that. And you're also kind of just making me think about how important the finesse of it all is. That, I mean, I remember like when I was 20 years old and I was struggling to send out emails regularly and put out content regularly. And my problem was I was thinking in terms of these two extremes of teaching and selling, right? Because if you sell, then if they're not at the point ready to buy, then they're not going to buy. And if you're teach, then they're like, well, why do I need to buy from you? You're already teaching. And I didn't understand the difference between teaching and you just said value just now. And value doesn't necessarily mean teach step by step. Value for someone might be encouragement. It might be some little tip. It might be sending you on your way. It might be this fun story. And I mean, you and I can probably think of stories from 20, 30 years ago that someone just said that kind of sticks in your head about something that kind of helped you to get to where you need to go. And so this is all very cool and very helpful. And so Podcastcola helps people get on podcasts. You say, don't represent yourself, because the phrase represent yourself reminds me of like being in court, right? If you're representing yourself in court, you're totally screwed. And when you have a podcast show, you get pitches all the time. And I get pitches from weirdos. And sometimes it's just like 2 little sentences. And I'm like, I'll take almost anyone, but even if it's like too weird, like I won't take them. But then when it comes from like a booking agency such as yourself, like I know what you're talking about, where if they had really good guests, if they had like 2 or 3 good guests, from that point forward, I don't even look at the bio. I'm just like, they come from this source, like I'm in, I'll take them. So I can see the value in that. And so is there anything that you wish your Podcastcola clients knew before jumping in? Was there any kind of like awkwardness or learning curve, or just something that you wish your future clients always knew going in?
Yeah. So I think, like anything, there's a friend of mine, Ken Rutowski, always says that a professional is expensive, but an amateur costs a fortune. And it's so true. If you're really making the leap to invest in yourself, if you're like, you know what, I'm going to do this. I'm going to get my speaking gigs together. I'm going to get my book out there. I want people to hear my message, to buy my service or product. Do it right. You got to invest in yourself. And if you don't have the money, that's another story. If you don't have the money, go get the money and then come back when you have the money. But until then, don't do it unless you're going to do it right, would be the first thing that I would tell people. The second thing is that, who do podcasts work for? Okay. If you have a book and you're looking to sell books, podcasting is a terrible way to do that, because the ROI at the end of the day from doing it right, and you got to hire an agency like us, and you got to get out there and craft your story and get out there and tell it, is going to be low. Even if you sell 100 books a month or 1,000 books a month, it's still going to be very low. Okay. What it works for is anybody that has a back end. So if you have an online course, if you are a coach, if you have a mentorship program, if you get paid like a lot of our guests do, tens of thousands of dollars for public speaking, then it makes sense. And you use the book as your source of authority to get into these shows. Because as a book, you're like, hey, I'm the guy that wrote the book on matcha green tea. Get me on to talk about matcha tea. I'm the guy that wrote the book on podcasting. Get me on shows about podcasting, right? Or whatever it is that you do. So in that way, you really want to make sure, A, that you're doing it right, and B, that you have a back end that's bringing revenue to you. And by the way, I deal with best-selling authors. I deal with all the top publishers who bring us on to get people. And sometimes these publishers need hundreds of shows for their authors, and we do that. There are very few authors around that make money just from selling their books. The majority of people have some back end where their real revenue comes in. And that's where podcasts can be a real boom for you.
And that's a great message that I mean, first of all, if someone of a podcast guest comes to me and they have a book, I'm thinking like that's great because there will be material to talk about. I won't have to carry the conversation. But that's like the big concern for me there. And then and I've been amazed at kind of your answers here because they're soundbitey. I can tell that you practiced and refined it. And what's also kind of something that's cool is that your positioning is you made sure to kind of build a fence around your idea and say like, this is not for you. So like, it's always kind of cool just to see how someone else does the podcast interview and kind of make the little mental notes. And I can tell that, what you practice what you're preaching, you know what you're talking about, and you pass this on to your clients. So Podcastcola, you say to do it and have your goal and have your back end and do it right and have your budget. And so like, what's the approximate price point? If someone says, okay, Shaahin says I need to have the money ready and do it right, are we talking like in $1,000 range, $10,000 range or more? What's the approximate budget for what someone needs from you?
Yeah, and you're right. It's not right for everybody, but for people who want to accelerate, it is right. And I'll tell you what. So to answer your question, it's the cheapest form of advertising and marketing that you'll do. And the ROI will be higher than any other type of advertising. I've got clients that are running $500,000 a week in Facebook ads, and we outdo them by getting them booked on shows. Our rate, so the way we work is we're a flat model agency. We charge one flat transparent rate. It's under $1,500 a month. It's $1,497 a month. It's a year agreement, so just like a cell phone bill. So it'll be $1,500 a month. And the cool thing is we don't throttle you, unlike other agencies. So we are unlimited. As many shows as you can handle, and there are over 7 million podcasts out there right now, many in your niche, we book you on. So you tell us what your schedule is like. On the minimum, you need a floating hour a week. The maximum, we can just book you for hours that you have available. And for a lot of people, it's not only like a way to grow your business, but it's a lot of fun. Like that's why guys like me and you do it, because it's a great way to talk and meet cool people. And I've done business with a lot of the show hosts that I've met. A lot of the show hosts have called me and say, hey, Shaahin, can you help me with my Amazon? Can you help me do this? Can you help me get booked on other people's shows? Because I want to grow my podcast, which is the other secret. If you have a podcast or thinking of having your own podcast, the quickest way to grow is by getting on other people's shows and borrowing their audience for you.
And it makes perfect sense. Like if you want to build your list, want to build your audience, you have your own podcast, it doesn't make a lot of sense to try to say, well, let me try to run Facebook ads to convince someone to go from Facebook to my podcast. But going from their podcast to your podcast, that seems like a much more logical transition. If you're looking for podcast listeners, why not go the easy route? Why not meet them where they're at? And this sounds like an amazing offer because like you said, have the floating every week or just like load up the schedule so that way you can be the spokesperson of your business, which is like what you're supposed to do, right? That's what they always say. Like, as an entrepreneur or a business owner, you're supposed to be the idea person and the face. And then you go out there and you get your messaging out. And then when you get the clients come in and you build your team, you build your infrastructure to do the work. That way you have this like sellable asset and you're working on your business, not in your business, and all those other things people say. So everyone who's listening to this podcast, if you made it this far, which you did because you're still listening, we know Shaahin and I know that you're interested in this and that you need this, and that you should at least pursue it and go to the website and do some research and book a call or contact him and his team. So is podcastcola.com the next logical place to go?
Yeah, just go to podcastcola.com. For anybody who's watching, I'll do a free 15-minute consultation with anybody, with me or one of our senior publicists. And at the very least, you'll get some insight on if you're right for being on podcasts and like what your strategy would be. It's no obligation. And anybody that's interested, I'm happy to do that for you.
Well, fabulous. So Podcastcola is the next place to go. And you know what, Shaahin, you said that you won't sell, but I will. I will sell all day long for you on the show. I'll give them the hard selling pack. So podcastcola.com is the next place to go. And as we wrap up our conversation, as you know, as a podcaster, you want to end with a bang, not a whimper. So do you have any final parting words or advice, or advice you'd heard 20 years ago, or just something to end us on a real strong note? What comes to mind as far as just wrapping up our conversation?
Yeah, look, if you're going to do it right. And that means you focus on, like you said, working on your business, not in your business. And do what I do. I bring on the best people in whatever fields I need to accelerate my business. So whatever you do, find out who the best is, bring them on board, and do it right. And again, if you don't have the money to do it right now, wait till you do. But if you do, the best bang for your buck is going to be booked on podcasts. Come see us, podcastcola.com, podcastcola.com.